The highly anticipated talks touched on a range of sensitive issues, but both stressed a responsibility to avoid conflict as the world's two superpowers. Our correspondents in Beijing, Washington, Taipei, and Brussels are standing by with reactions from around the world. First, though, a look at the Chinese perspective.
总统先生你好，今天是我们第一次以视频的方式会晤，看到老朋友感到很高兴。
Smiles and waves as Chinese President Xi Jinping met his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden in a highly anticipated meeting, the first since Mr. Biden came to power in January. Chinese state media were quick to report on proceedings and keen to show a friendly atmosphere between the two leaders.
这是造福两国人民的需要，也是国际社会的期待。
In his opening remarks, President Xi said he would be willing to work with President Biden to build consensus and take active steps to move bilateral relations forward in a positive direction. Although he also emphasized that both sides need to respect each other, coexist peacefully, and pursue win-win cooperation.
当前中美发展都处在关键阶段，人类是一个地球村。 我们面临着诸多的挑战。中美作为世界前两大经济体和联合国安理会的常任理事国，应该加强沟通和合作。
Perhaps revealing the challenges of the troubled relationship, both sides seem to emphasize different points in statements released at the end of the meeting. On the issue of Taiwan, Chinese state media reported that President Xi warned that the mainland will have to take decisive measures if pro-independence forces provoke the issue or cross the red line, adding that U.S. support for Taiwanese independence would be like playing with fire.
美方应当遵守 中美间达成的正式双边协议和联合国大会以压倒性多数通过的正式决议，绝大多数国家坚持一个中国原则的事实和意志，用行动取信于中国人民，取信于国际社会。
Beijing was also keen to emphasize that President Biden stated that his government does not support Taiwan independence forces, although the White House on its part said President Biden expressed strong opposition to unilateral efforts to change the status quo or undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. President Biden also reportedly raised concerns over China's human rights practices in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong, something that President Xi said China is willing to discuss, but only on the basis of mutual respect.
中方多次强调，包括香港在内的有关事务完全是中国内部事务，任何国家不得干涉。我们坚决反对 借人权问题干涉中国内政的行为。
But even as differences clearly remain, China and the U.S. continue to say they are open to cooperation.
Let's go to Gordon Chang because Benjamin just mentioned, of course, the president's conversation, virtual summit, I guess they're calling it, with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. Gordon, the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War, The Coming Collapse of China, et al. Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Neil.
This powwow, virtual, what will come of it? What do they each get off their respective chests?
Well, probably very little in the way of deliverables because the administration has been downplaying expectations. What they want to do, they say, is establish guardrails. But after 5 decades of intensive diplomacy with China, you would think that we would be beyond this point, which shows you that our approach really has been wrong because China's been moving in very much the wrong directions, not only with regard to the United States, but also the international community.
What do you make of the fact that at the same time, we had two potential adversaries getting increasingly adversarial? I'm talking about Russia along with Ukraine, and certainly what it's been doing with oil, and China with, like, everything else.
Yeah, this is the critical point that you raise, because Russia and China do coordinate their foreign policies.
Do they really? So they're in sync on that?
Oftentimes.
Yeah.
And they also coordinate their military activities, and both now want to redraw the maps, one of Europe, one of East Asia, by force. So you've got the pressure on Poland, which, by the way, is a NATO ally, and of course with Ukraine, and then there's Taiwan. And, you know, Chinese troops are now in Indian-controlled territory, so that looks like an invasion. This really is a situation where you can see problems at both ends of the Eurasian landmass, and this could spread beyond Eurasia.
Now, normally countries entertain this sort of action against or amid protests in the U.S., thinking we won't make good on those protests or stern warnings. So Russia thinking in the case of a potential invasion of Ukraine, or China with a potential invasion, more Taiwan-administered islands before Taiwan, that we won't do anything?
Yes, and that's their calculus. I mean, they look at the White House, they see you in disarray. After the fall of Afghanistan, there was a noticeable change in Chinese propaganda saying that the U.S. was incapable of winning wars. And they mentioned actually Taiwan, saying, well, when we invade, Taiwan will fall in ours and the U.S. won't come to help. And also, there's something else disturbing, and that is in People's Daily, which is official, the most official publication in China, they're actually talking about the U.S. Launching barbaric, quote-unquote, attacks against China. This is propaganda, and we Americans never pay attention to it. But what China is doing is laying the justification for a strike on the U.S. or U.S. interests. So this is a particularly dangerous time for us because we're not paying attention.
We always assume that, given our economic relationship and that we both feed off each other, that China needs us a lot more than we need them. And so China wouldn't risk doing anything to rock that boat. What do you think of that?
It sounds like a nice argument, and I think it works most of the time, but in periods of stress, it won't. Remember, there were high levels of trade between Germany and England just before World War I.
Very good point.
And really the important thing here is not the level of trade, but it's the direction. And when countries think that their interdependence is going on a declining slope, the threshold for the use of force declines as well. So this is a time that Xi Jinping can take us by surprise because we really don't know what's going on inside Beijing. But common sense says that he's in real trouble. He has really an incentive to lash out, and that means we're not thinking in those directions.
But they have to realize in so doing, I mean, whatever you think of the U.S. response, all economic bets are off. The Chinese economy is ravaged with inflation. We just don't know how ravaged. It would just be inviting, you know, economic disaster of its own, wouldn't it?
Sure, but remember, Xi Jinping has very different interests. He's raised the cost of losing political struggles. He's got all the accountability in the world because he's taken power from everybody. So he can't blame anybody inside China right now, which means the only parties that he can blame are foreign ones, which is, I think, accounts for the difference in propaganda in China, where they're really going after the U.S. And so you put all this together and it says they may calculate their interests very differently than the way we think they should.
What about their short-term calculation hosting the Winter Olympics? They want that to go through, right? I mean, that's a few months off, but they wouldn't make any moves before then, would they?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But, you know,
you don't know? All right, it's crazy.
We're thinking like Americans.
Yeah.
And remember, Xi Jinping, he wants to close off China. He's already been doing that for a number of years, but especially over the last 4 or 5 months, he's accelerated that process. So if Biden doesn't go to Beijing, well, he's going to use that as saying, look, these foreigners are trying to contain China. This is what the Japanese media said prior to World War II. So we're seeing these parallels between Japan in the 1930s and China at our time right now, closing themselves off, really dangerous.
Wow, scary stuff. I hope this time you're wrong, Gordon.
I hope I'm wrong, too.
Yeah. All right, Gordon Chang, thank you very much. I thank Gordon, but I thank you just the same.